Hi everybody, my name is Anne. Thanks for joining me today in my home studio. You're watching Art on the Creek, and I so appreciate you joining us today. We are doing a series of 15 beginner watercolor lessons every Wednesday at the first quarter of 2023. And today you are just in time for lesson 10. You don't need to do these lessons in any particular order, and they're all on a playlist. It'll be down in the description. But today we're going to paint some daffodils. Are you ready? Let's learn how to do that. Well, welcome everyone to lesson 10. I've got the daffodil already drawn. I have my paper taped off, and we're using our Princeton snap brushes as we always do. I've got a kneaded eraser handy, and I'm using just a regular Clic school supply pencil. It's just a number 2 pencil. I'm going to go over these lines just a little bit more so that you can see them on camera. I have a feeling they kind of get washed out, and I've readjusted my lighting, so hopefully this episode will be a little bit more helpful to you and easier for you to see. Let me know in the comments if you like this setup a little bit better. So I'm just going over the essential lines here. I will link to the reference photo in the description, and you can just print that off on a sheet of printer paper, trace over the lines that you think are important with a Sharpie, and then tape that up to your window and put your watercolor paper over that and trace it onto your watercolor paper. If you use that method, you may have to resize the picture in your printer program just a little bit. I'm going to prime my paints with just water. I'm just spraying them with some water just to get them going. I found that on some days when it's exceptionally dry, that is a really good thing to do. I'm starting out with some lemon yellow. We're just going to put in several layers on this daffodil. And I'm just getting a little puddle of lemon yellow ready to go because I want to be able to water it down. And let's just go in and start. We're going to just paint the entire surface of the daffodil in lemon yellow. If you find that this video moves a little too quickly for you, I do have it edited to save time, so don't hesitate to just pause and get caught up at your own pace. Now let's go in with our darker yellow, and this is going to be that second one there in your palette. We start off with the lemon yellow, and now this one is the cadmium yellow hue. I'm just going in and adding a little bit of shading to our daffodil just to give it a round look. I'm kind of carefully going in these ruffles here, not going into the trumpet section of the flower, down into the pit there. I'm just going around the edge and just kind of creating some key shading moments. We're going to do that on some of the petals too. As we work around the flower, we are pretty much going to be doing wet in wet. Now, you'll notice in some places, perhaps you won't notice, but like right here, for instance, my first layer of lemon yellow has already dried. So I'm just kind of adding those strokes of cadmium yellow hue in, just kind of artistically to represent the dimension, the folds in the leaf. They're kind of, those petals rather, they're kind of rigid, and they have a lot of texture to them with some ups and downs, some waviness, especially around the collar of that little trumpet of the flower. It's just so beautiful. In the same well where you had the yellow in your palette, just add some burnt sienna. This is the brown that is right next to your green. So it's, if you don't have it labeled, it is 1, 2, 3, fourth one from the edge there, from the white. So you'll go ahead, and now we're adding just some shadows. It's going to look awkward for a little bit. This is where your painting will start to go through an ugly phase, and it always does in watercolor. The best advice I can give you is just to keep going. It's just not going to be pretty for a while. Just accept that. It's kind of like an awkward teen at this point. It's just, it's growing into its beauty. So we're going to go ahead and go in with that burnt sienna and continue to shade, paying attention in our reference photos to where these shadows fall. While we're doing this, I'm also really thinking in my head that where the light is coming from. And in this painting, it's pretty much straight above the flower. Not as we're looking at it here, but just if you were looking at a flat map, it would be almost due north. The light is pointing straight down on the flower, so that gives us some really great shadows falling down on these petals. And you'll see every once in a while I'm going in with just a wet brush or another wash of lemon yellow to either reactivate that paint and keep it going. Here, this is a wash of lemon yellow, so you can see how this works. And I'm just blending it lightly, trying to not agitate the pigment underneath too much. I want to be able to keep those subtle nuances that I've already put in, but I do want to intensify that lemon yellow a little bit. So that's what this layer wash is about. We're just putting that lemon yellow over, and you can see the cadmium yellow still shows through. If you don't have a heat tool, you're going to want to walk away from your painting for a while and let it thoroughly dry. But I've dried mine with a heat tool, and you see that gray mix that I've got going over there? I went into that middle palette section there that I haven't used yet, and I've started a mix of ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson. And purple is a wonderful shade to have adjacent to yellow and orange because it's kind of it's a complementary color. And what that means is that they are opposites on the color wheel. So that will give us some great visual energy in our painting, and it will just really help those shadows to kind of bounce off the page. If I were to go in and just use a straight gray or to intensify that brown, the painting would end up having less dimension. So you'll see me continually try to work with this shadow to try and get it to do exactly what I wanted it to do. I don't think I had my water mixture quite right, but that is a-okay because we're going to go in at the end with some colored pencils and really make these shadows pop. So right now we're just going around the edge of our, the roughly edge of the trumpet of the flower there, and we're adding some of these more intense shadows. And once again, they're going to look really a lot darker than they will when they dry. You have to remember that watercolor has that color shift when it dries, and it will dry a couple of shades lighter. So don't worry if these shadows appear that they are just shocking, blaring in your face right now. They will tone down after the painting dries, and we're going to continue to blend them a little bit also. We'll continue this process going all the way around the ruffle of the trumpet just to accentuate those folds. And then you'll find that with that purple and just with generally coaxing it, you'll have to play with it and see how dark you want your purple to be. You might want to add a little bit more red to it or a little bit more ultramarine. You may even want to add some of that burnt sienna and bring it into more of a gray. Whatever looks best to your eye, and however this looks on your monitor, every monitor is different, so I'm not exactly sure what it looks like that way, but whatever looks best to your naked eye, that would be the shade of purple to use. Now we're going to go in again and dry this completely with a heat tool. After every time I dry my paintings, I like to assess them. And this one for me, that shadow looked a little out of place, so I've wet the entire trumpet shell, that center cup portion of the flower, and I'm pulling that purple out a little bit to get it to gently blend with the yellow that's there. This is the portion in your painting where you're going to be working on a lot of fine-tune adjustments just to bring that into focus. I always liken this to adjusting the brightness, the contrast, or the tint on an old color television. But if that's not something you're familiar with, maybe you're familiar with a manual focus camera where you kind of have to continually turn that and make sure that you have everything lined up so that the picture is crisp and clear. I'm extending that purple out into the petals a little bit because that will help create the harmony between the petals and that trumpet cup, but it will also help to define all of those little folds that occur naturally in the daffodil in the petals. And I'm very carefully going in with just the tip of my number 6 brush. I used a number 6 throughout this whole thing. If you wanted to change and use your other brushes, you certainly could, but I felt that the number 6 was sufficient for all of this. And I'm just gradually taking that shadow into that one petal that would be behind. Now that I have that very small petal that's kind of tucked away and hiding, shaded to a good value that I like, I can go ahead and water that purple down a little bit and continue to add the veins and structure in that petal there that's kind of at the top left. And now I'm going to go in with that the cadmium yellow hue again and kind of just wash over this and blend all of these together, continually trying to catch everything up. Look at the values in your reference photo and see which petal, and I know these petals in our reference photo are pretty out of focus in the back, but you can see by value, by intensity of color, how to shade the petals that you're painting. Now you might be thinking to yourself, Anne, this is really too dark. It doesn't look at all like a daffodil. Daffodils are bright yellow. I'm right there with you. Don't worry. I know that, as I mentioned, things go through an ugly phase, and we're kind of hanging out there a little bit with this one, but that's all part of the plan. We're going to go in at the end, like I said, with some colored pencil and help add some dimension to this. But right now, what we're going to do is really focus on where the petals lie in the visual plane. Your best rule of thumb that you can remember whenever you're painting anything at all is that when you add shadows to something, that will make that area recede. And when something is left brighter or with fewer layers, that area will come forward toward the viewer. Now let's go in and create that one little leaf that's peeking up. I'm going to use a sap green. And when I darken it to get a little bit of dimension in there, I'm just going to add that same green to that purple mix that we've had going up there. So it's just going to be a little bit of a darker version coming in. And even though we're going wet and wet here, a good key to remember is to not have your paint too wet or too dry when you're going wet into wet. You want to have the paint about the same level of wetness as what you're going into, and then they will be able to blend. Otherwise, the paint will seep up into your brush, or you'll just leave a blotch of water. Now let's go ahead, and this is kind of fun. We're going to get into that cadmium red hue, and I'm mixing that into our pile of yellow that we had going up at the top, and I'm just putting those 3 little pistils, stamens, can't remember what they're called, the part that the bee gets into and gets the pollen from. Just put some of those in there. And now we're going to go in with a little bit more of that burnt sienna mixed with the yellow, and we'll create that depth, that shading that will let us know that this is a hollow trumpet cup shape and that it does go down deeper. Take a minute to walk away from your painting or let it dry completely. I've dried mine with the heat tool again. And now I'm using a technique that we've used before. It's called lifting off. I think that shadow there just isn't quite working for me, and I don't want to risk overworking the painting, but I do want to take some of this color out. And now what I've done that, I've got a wet brush and I'm just running it gently over the surface to kind of lift off some of that color. So let me dry that with a heat tool, and then I think I'll go in and wash that with a little bit of lemon yellow to just kind of brighten it up. Alrighty, once again, I've dried that very thoroughly with the heat tool. And now we have a mix of ultramarine and alizarin crimson in a fresh well on your palette. You want this to only be these 2 colors. We're going to use a very nice purple. Get it to whatever shade of purple you want. It can be a more blue purple or a more red purple like I have here. And we're just going to fill in the background with that purple. Don't worry at this point if your paint is uneven, because I'm going to show you a really fun effect. You know how I always talk about cauliflower blooms and backgrounds and how those are something you don't want? Well, today we're going to play with some. Let's skip ahead to that part and you can see how that works. If your paper is still damp, you can do this. I decided to go ahead and dry mine because I can't possibly keep it all the same level of wetness here in my dry climate, but we'll just dry it with a heat tool. And now I'm going in with just some water, and I am really just placing water all over in the areas that are purple. And you'll notice where I place it, if you just wait just a second, you can see it change and shift. I've already got some neat cauliflower blooms happening, and now I'll just kind of pull them around and play a little bit just to get that pigment underneath disturbed. There you can really see that on the left-hand side, how that's starting to lift up the pigment and make some interesting texture. This is kind of going to look a little bit like batik or tie-dye when we're done. Now this has had time to dry, so I do recommend getting up and going for a little walk or something, because in order to get that cool background effect, it really does need to dry on its own, and that's kind of hard to sit and literally watch paint dry. So now that it's thoroughly dry, let's go in with some Prismacolors. I've got here a lime green that I'm going to start with, and I'm just going around the edge of this leaf here. It's kind of hard to pick up on camera, but you can really tell when you color on it that this will give it a nice velvety finish. If you don't like that, then you can certainly skip this step. But I really love colored pencil with watercolor, and I think it just adds some really nice dimensions. So now let's get our next green. I think I'm going to go in with this moss green next. And that's kind of a mid-tone. Let's just add just a little bit of veining in this leaf here. And just fill in those shapes wherever you feel that would give it some nice shading and dimension. And we'll finish it up with a kelp green, which is the darkest level of green. Remember that what you color in darker will recede, and the parts that you color lighter are going to come forward. So this is just kind of a little bit of sketching in there to make that look as if it's got a little bit of curvature to it. Now let's start working on the daffodil. I've got a very old Prismacolor here. This one is called Canary, and I'm just going to go in and brighten up. It's kind of a buttery yellow. I'll brighten up the areas where I see that it's the brightest around the edge here. This is also a really good way to clean up any rough edges that you have. If you kind of missed with your paintbrush a little bit and got some paint where you didn't want it, colored pencil can save a lot of those kinds of oopsies. But I'm putting in this the canary color everywhere where I want it its brightest, and I think I'll bring a little bit more color into some of these petals as well. Now I think I'll go in and add the darker shade, and I'm just going to use a yellow ochre. It's a nice goldish color, and it won't add too much. It'll just give a subtle amount of shading, and that's all I'm looking for right now. I don't want to add any more darkness to our daffodil because that purple really is kind of strong. We'll come in and highlight the shadows. We'll accentuate the shadows in a little bit with a couple of purples, but for now I just want to get a little bit of these gold textures built up. And you can do that anywhere where it feels like it needs a little bit of shading. You can see when I put the pencil on its side here and color in the petal, how that gave it a lot of curvature. Now I have this gray lavender. I've got two lavenders that I'm going to use, but if you're ever unsure, go with the lighter one first because you can always go in and darken it up. You can put lighter colored pencil over colored pencil, but it's better to go light to dark in this case. So I'm just taking that grayed lavender and I'm going around and kind of accentuating the shadows very lightly. I'm not putting down a lot of color at all, just in general kind of putting that shadow line in there. And then I'll finish it up with a lilac. And as you can see immediately when I put that lilac down, it just really jumps off the page and gives us a nice strong shadow. So you know what this means. This is my favorite time. We get to take the tape off and leave that nice crisp white border. I intentionally made this border a little bit thicker because I was thinking that maybe this would be a fun card. So finished measurements on this one are about 4 by 6. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Let's go ahead and sign our name. Don't forget to sign your name and put the date on your painting so that you can remember when you did this. I so appreciate you painting along with me, and I hope you're feeling like you're really learning watercolor. It is a lifetime to master, but it sure is fun to keep practicing. My daffodil came out with a beautiful golden hue, and you can see all of that wonderful dimension we got in the background with those water droplets, and the colored pencils sure add some nice effect to it. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you next time. Take care.